When did you realize your life was in danger? My friend Megan grabbed my arm while we were shopping for jeans and whispered, "Don't turn around, but is that guy following us?" I glanced over my shoulder and saw a man in a gray hoodie looking at his phone that was angled toward us. We'd noticed him earlier in the food court, then again at Sephora. We decided to test it and left suddenly, walking toward Forever 21. And there he was, coming up the escalator. Now my heart was racing. Megan said we should go to security, but I felt stupid because what would we say? That some guy was shopping in the same stores. We couldn't see his face clearly under the hood, and he wasn't doing anything obviously threatening, just existing near us. We ducked into the crowded store and wove through racks of clothes, trying to lose him. I saw him enter and stop near the entrance, scanning the store systematically, row by row. We crouched behind a display and Megan whispered, "Why would someone follow us? What if he's some creep who saw us and just decided we were easy targets?" That made my skin crawl. We waited until he moved deeper into the store, then slipped out the side entrance. We speedwalked toward the department store, figuring we could cut through to the parking garage. My hands were shaking as I texted my roommate where we were, just in case something happened. We made it to the department store and started weaving through the makeup counters, past the jewelry, toward the back exit. I was starting to breathe normally again when Megan froze. He was there again, coming through the main entrance, moving faster now like he knew we'd spotted him and didn't care about being subtle anymore. We ran toward the back exit and I could hear footsteps behind us, not running but walking fast, steady, deliberate, like he knew we couldn't really escape. An employee asked if we needed help, and I wanted to scream yes, but Megan pulled me along, saying, "The exit's right there." We burst into the parking garage and the temperature dropped instantly, cold concrete and shadows everywhere. We ran toward where I'd parked on level 3. I fumbled for my keys while we ran, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them and they skittered across the concrete. Megan grabbed them and we reached my car in a dark corner where I'd parked that morning. She clicked the unlock button but nothing happened. She tried again, pressing it desperately, but still nothing. The battery in the key fob must have died. I grabbed the keys to manually unlock it, but my hands were shaking too much to get the key in the lock. That's when we heard the garage door slam open behind us, the sound echoing off every surface. He was coming, walking straight toward us with purpose. I finally got the key in, but it wouldn't turn, like the lock was jammed or frozen from sitting all day. Megan was pulling on the door handle, frantically saying, "Come on, come on, come on!" He was getting closer, steady footsteps echoing off concrete, and now he was speeding up, almost jogging. I was fighting with the key, trying to force it, and it finally turned, but the door wouldn't open. Something was wrong with it, stuck or broken. He was 20 feet away now, and I saw him reach into his jacket pocket, pulling something out that glinted. Megan turned to face him, maybe to scream for help, but the garage was empty. The lights illuminated his face as his hood fell back, and Megan made this horrible gasping sound, her whole body going rigid. She grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin, drawing blood. "Oh God," she said, her voice high and terrified. "I know who that is. Run." We both turned and ran, our shoes slapping against the concrete as we sprinted back toward the department store entrance. Ian's footsteps got louder behind us, and I could hear him breathing hard, gaining on us. The door felt impossibly far away, and my legs were already burning from the sprint. Megan yanked the door open, and we stumbled inside, nearly crashing into a mannequin display. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone, but I managed to dial 911 while we dodged between racks of coats and dresses. The operator's voice came through, and I tried to explain where we were, but my words came out jumbled and panicked. Megan grabbed my arm and pulled me deeper into the store while I told the operator we were being chased at Westfield Mall. A sales associate saw us running, and her eyes went wide with concern. She waved us toward a door marked "Employees Only," and ushered us through without asking questions. The break room smelled like coffee and microwaved food. The associate locked the door behind us and immediately picked up the store phone to call mall security. I was still on with the 911 operator, giving her more details about our location while Megan paced back and forth, her face pale. The sales associate pointed to a small monitor on the wall that showed the security camera feed from the store floor. We crowded around it and watched Ian stop at the store entrance, his head turning left and right as he scanned the area. 2 security guards were walking toward the entrance from the mall corridor, and Ian must have spotted them because he suddenly turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction. My whole body was still shaking, and the security guard who arrived a few minutes later had to ask me to repeat myself twice. Megan kept looking at her phone and wouldn't meet my eyes, which made my stomach twist into knots. After we gave our initial report about the man following us through the mall, Megan finally looked up and her voice came out small and scared. She told the guard she knew him, that his name was Ian, and they'd talked on Instagram months ago. She said they met once for coffee, but she blocked him when he got too intense, sending her dozens of messages every day. My fear mixed with anger that she hadn't told me when she first recognized him in the parking garage. The security guard suggested we check our bags and phones for any tracking devices since Ian seemed to know exactly where we were. We dumped everything from our purses onto the break room table, lipstick and gum and receipts scattering everywhere. Megan found it first, tucked into the side pocket of my tote bag where I never look. It was a small white disc, about the size of a quarter and definitely not mine. The security guard used a tissue to pick it up and put it in a plastic bag while calling the real police on his radio. 2 patrol officers showed up within 20 minutes, their uniforms and badges making everything feel more serious and official. Detective Glover arrived shortly after, a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She was thorough and professional, asking us to write down everything we remembered while it was still fresh. She took the AirTag and its evidence bag and said they'd pull all the mall's security footage from today. Megan pulled up her Instagram on her phone and showed the detective the old messages she'd never deleted from Ian. They started out friendly enough, talking about movies and music, but quickly turned obsessive when Megan didn't respond fast enough. He'd sent her 43 messages in one day after she told him she wasn't interested in dating. The messages got worse from there, alternating between calling her beautiful and calling her stuck up for ignoring him. Detective Glover took photos of everything with her phone and wrote down Ian's full name and username. She asked if we had any other contact with him, or if we'd seen him around campus before today. Megan shook her head, but I remembered something, and told the detective about seeing a gray Honda following us last week. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it made sense. The detective wrote everything down in her notebook and said she'd run Ian's information through their system. She gave us each her business card and said she'd be in touch soon about getting a restraining order. The mall security offered to walk us to our cars, but I didn't want to go back to that parking garage. Megan called her roommate to come pick us up while I sat there trying to process everything that had happened. My tote bag sat on the table and I kept staring at the pocket where the AirTag had been hidden. How long had it been there and when did Ian put it in my bag? The thought of him being close enough to slip it in without me noticing made me feel sick. Detective Glover said she'd have officers check the parking garage and see if my car was tampered with. She also suggested we stay somewhere else tonight, just to be safe until they could locate Ian and bring him in for questioning. Megan's roommate texted that she was outside, and the security guard walked us to the mall entrance. Every person in a hoodie made my heart race, and I kept looking over my shoulder even though I knew Ian was probably long gone. We got in the car, and Megan finally started crying, apologizing over and over for not telling me about Ian sooner. The detective told us to wait while officers checked the parking garage, and around 8 p.m. 2 patrol cars pulled up to escort us to our vehicles. My hands were still shaking when I got behind the wheel and turned the key, but the engine started right up on the first try. The car that wouldn't unlock an hour ago now worked perfectly fine, which made me wonder if Ian had done something to it, or if panic just made everything worse. Megan followed me in her car with a police cruiser behind each of us all the way to my apartment complex. Back at my place, my roommate Dwayne was waiting with his laptop already open and started helping us set up location sharing on our phones. He made us download 3 different safety apps and showed us how to send emergency alerts with just 2 taps. We spent an hour going over escape routes from campus buildings and agreeing to text each other our locations every few hours. Dwayne said we needed to vary our routines, take different paths to class, and never go anywhere alone for at least the next few weeks. That night, I checked the deadbolt 6 times before getting into bed and jumped at every sound from the hallway. The neighbor's TV through the wall made me sit up in panic, and I kept getting up to peek through the blinds at the parking lot. Around 3 a.m., a car door slammed and I pressed my face against the window, scanning every shadow until my eyes burned. I maybe got 2 hours of broken sleep before my phone buzzed with Instagram notifications. 3 friend requests from accounts with no profile pictures and generic usernames like user847263 and John_Smith9274. The messages were short but made my skin crawl. One said just wanted to talk, another said you didn't have to run, and the third said this is all a misunderstanding. I took screenshots of everything before blocking the accounts and immediately forwarded them to Detective Glover's email. She responded within 10 minutes even though it was barely 7 a.m., saying this helped establish a pattern of harassment and to keep documenting everything. Megan came over for lunch and we walked to our afternoon sociology class together, both of us checking over our shoulders every few steps. After class, we headed back to my apartment, and when we turned the corner to my hallway, Megan grabbed my arm. Our apartment door was open about 3 inches even though we both remembered double-checking the lock before we left. We backed away immediately, and I called 911 from the stairwell while Megan watched the door. 2 officers arrived in under 5 minutes and told us to wait in the lobby while they cleared the apartment. They went through every room, checked closets and underbeds, even looked behind the shower curtain. Nothing was missing or obviously disturbed, but knowing Ian might have been in our space, touching our things, maybe going through our drawers made me want to throw up. The officers dusted the doorknob and frame for fingerprints while suggesting we call a locksmith immediately to change all the locks. One officer said the lock showed signs of tampering, tiny scratches around the keyhole that weren't there this morning. My shift at the campus bookstore started in an hour, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking and I couldn't imagine dealing with customers. I called my manager Milana and told her what happened, my voice cracking when I explained about the break-in. She was understanding and said to take the night off, but warned that if this kept affecting my attendance, I'd need to get official documentation from the police. The locksmith arrived and changed our locks while Megan and I sat on the couch, both of us too wired to eat the Chinese takeout Dwayne brought home. Detective Glover called around 9 p.m. with an update that actually made me feel better for the first time all day. The mall security footage clearly showed Ian following us from the store to the store for over an hour, entering each shop right after us and watching us from across the food court. She said this was exactly the evidence they needed to move forward with criminal stalking charges. Megan sat down with her laptop and started typing out everything she remembered about Ian for the detective. She gave his last name, the coffee shop where they met 6 months ago, and even remembered where he said he worked part-time at an electronics store downtown. The detective ran his information through their system while we were still on the phone and confirmed his identity matched the person in the security footage. He had no prior criminal record, but the detective said that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous, just that he hadn't been caught before. Detective Glover called me the next morning to say she'd tried reaching Ian at his workplace, but he wouldn't come to the phone. Instead, he sent an email through his manager claiming this was all a big misunderstanding and he was just shopping at the mall like anyone else. The email went on to say Megan was making things up because she was embarrassed about how she'd led him on months ago, and now wanted to pretend she never knew him. Reading his words made my hands shake with anger, but Detective Glover said this was actually good for us because it showed he was aware of what he'd done and was trying to cover his tracks. She brought over a stack of paperwork for a temporary restraining order, and we sat at my kitchen table going through each page while Megan pulled up all the Instagram messages on her laptop. The forms wanted exact dates and times for everything, specific locations where we'd seen him, detailed descriptions of his behavior, and we had to list every piece of evidence we had. Megan and I spent the whole afternoon organizing everything into a timeline on poster board, printing screenshots, making copies of the police reports, and double-checking every detail matched. My eyes burned from staring at dates, and my hand cramped from writing, but seeing it all laid out like that made me realize how much evidence we actually had. The next day, we went to a campus safety workshop that the victim services coordinator had recommended. They taught us how to scan a room when we enter, identify exits, trust our gut feelings, and some basic moves to break free if someone grabs us. The instructor showed us how to use our keys as a weapon between our fingers and how to throw our weight backward if grabbed from behind. Practicing the moves with Megan made me feel stronger, even though my muscles were sore afterward. 3 days passed without any Ian sightings, and I was starting to relax a little when my neighbor from 2 doors down texted me a video. Ian was standing across the street from our building, just watching our windows from behind a parked car. The neighbor had already called the police, who showed up within 10 minutes and officially warned Ian to stay away from the property. Dwayne sat us down that night with a list of new apartment rules he'd written out on his laptop. No guests without telling everyone first. Keep all the blinds closed all the time. Text the group chat when we leave and when we get back. Never prop the door open even for a second. Megan rolled her eyes at some of them, but we both knew these rules could keep us safe. The new routine felt weird at first, but after a few days it became automatic to check in and keep the blinds down. That weekend, Megan finally told me the whole story about Ian while we were doing laundry in the basement. They'd actually met at her friend Rachel's birthday party where Megan was just being polite when he cornered her by the drinks table. He took her basic friendliness as flirting, and when she turned down his invitation for coffee the next day, he told everyone at the party she was a tease who led guys on for attention. She said his whole friend group turned against her and she had to stop going to Rachel's parties because of the rumors he spread. Detective Glover called Monday morning with new information that made my stomach drop. Ian worked part-time as a rideshare driver, and when they pulled his location data with a warrant, it showed he'd been accepting rides near our campus almost every day for the past month. The pattern was too regular to be random, always circling the same blocks where we had classes, always during the times we'd be walking around. She said this proved he'd been planning this for weeks and studying our schedules. Tuesday morning, I went out to my car to drive to work and found a small wrapped box tucked under my windshield wiper. My whole body went cold, and I backed away without touching it. calling the police from the parking lot while staring at the box like it might explode. The officers who came bagged it as evidence and took it to the station where they found partial fingerprints on the wrapping paper that matched work gloves from the electronics store where Ian worked. Inside was just a cheap necklace from a mall jewelry store, but knowing he'd been that close to my car, maybe watching me sleep from the parking lot, made me want to throw up. That night, Megan and I had our first real fight since this whole thing started. I was mad that she'd hidden the Ian connection when she first recognized him at the mall, and my voice got louder than I meant it to. She started crying and said she was ashamed of the whole thing and scared I'd think she brought this on us somehow. We were both yelling and crying in the living room while Dwayne hid in his bedroom, and finally we just sat on the floor exhausted. Megan said she was sorry for not telling me right away, and promised no more secrets between us. I told her I was sorry for yelling and that none of this was her fault, that Ian was the only one to blame for his actions. We hugged it out and agreed to be completely honest with each other from now on, no matter how embarrassing or scary something might be. Detective Glover came to our apartment the next morning with a thick folder and a laptop, spreading everything across our kitchen table while Megan made coffee. She pulled out printed screenshots of the Instagram messages, the mall security footage stills, and the AirTag evidence report, arranging them in chronological order on the table. I watched her highlight key dates with a yellow marker while Megan found our handwritten notes from that first night. The detective walked us through what would happen at the hearing, how the judge would ask us questions about specific incidents, and we practiced answering without getting too emotional or rambling. She had us repeat the main points over and over until we could say them clearly, even when our voices shook. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with an email notification from an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line made my stomach drop because it said, "Regarding recent misunderstanding, Ian Masterson." The email was from Ian's lawyer, and went on for 3 paragraphs about how Ian was deeply sorry for any confusion, how he never meant to frighten anyone, and how this was all just a big misunderstanding between friends. He wrote that Ian was hurt and confused by our reaction to what he thought was innocent behavior, and hoped we could resolve this without further legal action. Megan got the same email, and we both forwarded them to Detective Glover without responding, even though part of me wanted to write back and tell him exactly what I thought of his client. The detective added the emails to our evidence file and reminded us not to engage with Ian or his lawyer outside of official proceedings. My mom called that night after I finally worked up the courage to tell my parents what was happening, and I could hear the panic in her voice as she begged me to pack up and come home immediately. She said I could finish the semester online or transfer to the community college near home where I'd be safe, where they could protect me. My dad got on the phone too and offered to drive down that night to pick me up. Said he could be there in 4 hours and have me home by morning. I appreciated their concern, but told them I wasn't going to let Ian chase me away from my life, my friends, my education, everything I'd worked for. The next day at work, Milana pulled me into her office and said they were adjusting my schedule for safety reasons after I'd explained the situation. She moved all my shifts to daytime hours when other employees would always be present. No more closing shifts or early morning inventory alone. The new schedule meant fewer hours though, dropping from 30 hours a week to maybe 20, which meant my next paycheck would be a lot smaller. I did the math in my head and realized I'd have to dip into my savings for rent next month, adding financial stress on top of everything else. A few days later, campus security arranged to escort Megan and me back to the mall so we could practice being in that space again without panicking. The officer walked with us through the main entrance and I felt my chest tighten immediately, my breathing getting shallow as we passed the food court where we'd first noticed Ian. We walked the same path we'd taken that day, through the department store toward the parking garage, and when we got close to the garage entrance, my hands started shaking so bad I had to stuff them in my pockets. The security officer noticed and suggested we take a break, but I pushed through, walking into the garage and standing there for a full minute before we left. Megan squeezed my hand the whole time, and we actually bought some clothes on the way out, refusing to let that place become somewhere we couldn't go. That night we were watching TV when we heard a huge crash from upstairs, like someone had dropped a bowling ball or knocked over furniture. Megan and I both jumped up, grabbing our phones with 911 already dialed, our fingers hovering over the call button as we stared at the ceiling. We stood frozen for maybe 30 seconds before we heard our upstairs neighbor yelling sorry through the floor, saying she'd dropped her exercise weight while working out. We both started laughing, but it was that shaky, nervous laugh when you realize how on edge you've become, how ready you are to assume the worst. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9 in the morning, and I didn't sleep at all the night before. Walking into that courtroom and seeing Ian sitting at a table 20 feet away in a navy suit and tie made my skin crawl because he looked so normal, like any random guy you'd see at an office job. His lawyer was an older man with gray hair who kept whispering in Ian's ear while we took our seats with Detective Glover at the other table. Ian kept his eyes down mostly, but I caught him looking at us a few times with this expression like he was the victim here, like we were the ones causing him problems. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up and told the judge in this calm, reasonable voice that this was all a misunderstanding, that he'd simply been shopping at the mall that day too. He claimed he knew Megan from before and was surprised to see her, maybe followed for a bit hoping to say hello but never meant any harm. Detective Glover presented our evidence methodically, showing the judge the security footage that clearly showed Ian following us store to the store for over an hour. She explained about the AirTag found in my bag, showing the device in an evidence bag, and the report confirming partial prints from Ian's work gloves. Then she played the video my neighbor had taken of Ian standing outside our building, just watching our windows from across the street. The judge asked Ian's lawyer about the AirTag, and he claimed his client had no knowledge of how it got in my bag, suggesting maybe it fell in accidentally. The judge looked at him like he just said the sky was green and asked how an AirTag accidentally falls into someone's bag while shopping. She asked me and Megan some questions about how this had affected our daily lives, and Megan's voice cracked when she described being afraid to leave the apartment alone. After about an hour of testimony and evidence, the judge said she'd seen enough to establish a clear pattern of stalking behavior. She granted a 2-year restraining order requiring Ian to stay at least 500 feet away from us, our home, our workplaces, and our school campus. Ian's lawyer tried to argue that 500 feet was excessive in a college town where people naturally crossed paths, but the judge cut him off and said the distance stood. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks, but that relief lasted about 30 seconds. Megan grabbed my arm and pointed to the street where Ian's silver Honda was slowly driving past, him staring at us through the driver's side window even though the restraining order had literally just gone into effect. I pulled out my phone and started recording while Megan called Detective Glover, who was still inside the courthouse, telling her Ian was violating the order already. Detective Glover came running out of the courthouse with 2 patrol officers, and they spotted Ian's car turning the corner. The officers jumped in their cruiser and took off after him while Detective Glover stayed with us, writing down the exact time and taking photos of the street where we'd seen him. Within 45 minutes, she got a call that they'd arrested Ian 3 blocks away for violating the restraining order. He spent the night in jail but posted bail the next morning, though now he had additional criminal charges on top of the stalking case. That afternoon, Megan and I went to the hardware store and bought new deadbolts for our apartment doors. The locksmith came that evening and installed them while we watched him work, both of us memorizing which key went where. We started taking different routes to campus each day, sometimes walking down Oak Street, sometimes cutting through the student center, never using the same path twice in a row. Megan set up a group text with 3 of our closest friends where we'd check in every few hours with our location. Each small change made us feel a tiny bit safer, like we were taking back some control. Detective Glover called us in for a meeting 2 days later at the police station. She explained that Ian's arraignment was scheduled for 3 weeks out, and we'd need to write victim impact statements before then. She handed us pamphlets for victim services that offered free counseling and support groups for people dealing with stalkers. The criminal case would take months to work through the system, but she promised to keep us updated at every step. About a week later, Megan suggested we go back to the mall during the day without any escort. My stomach twisted at the idea, but I knew we couldn't avoid that place forever. We drove there on a Saturday afternoon when it was crowded with families and teenagers. Walking through the main entrance made my hands sweat, and I kept looking over my shoulder every few seconds. We made it to the food court and sat down for 10 minutes practicing the breathing exercises the victim services counselor had taught us. Megan bought a pretzel and I got a smoothie, forcing ourselves to act normal even though my heart was pounding. We even went into a few stores and bought some clothes, refusing to let fear control where we could go. That night we sat in my room and finally talked about everything that had happened between us. Megan apologized again for not telling me about Ian when she first recognized him at the mall. I admitted I was still hurt, but understood why she'd been scared and embarrassed to bring it up. We made new rules for our friendship, promising to tell each other everything even if it was awkward or scary. No more secrets, no more hiding things that might affect both of us. Our friendship felt different after that conversation. Stronger somehow because we'd gotten through something terrible together. The campus counseling center paired me with a therapist who specialized in helping stalking victims. She taught me techniques for managing the anxiety that would hit me at random times during the day. After 3 weeks of sessions, I finally slept through a whole night without waking up to check the locks. My daily routine started feeling almost normal again. Going to classes, working my shifts at the bookstore, hanging out with friends. 6 weeks after the restraining order hearing, the prosecutor assigned to Ian's case asked to meet with us. She was a woman in her 40s who explained that Ian's lawyer wanted to make a plea deal. He would plead guilty to stalking charges, serve 6 months of probation, and attend mandatory counseling for his behavior. If we agreed to the deal, we wouldn't have to testify at a trial and relive everything in front of a jury. The prosecutor said it was a decent offer considering first-time stalking charges rarely got jail time anyway. Megan and I talked it over and decided we'd rather avoid a trial where Ian could stare at us while we testified. We told the prosecutor we'd accept the plea deal. 3 months after that day at the mall, life had settled into something that felt surprisingly normal. Ian was serving his probation in another county where his parents lived, 200 miles away from us. The prosecutor sent us updates confirming he was attending his required counseling sessions and hadn't violated any terms of his probation. Megan and I were closer than we'd ever been, checking in with each other daily and being completely honest about everything. I still looked over my shoulder sometimes when walking alone, and I always checked my bag for tracking devices, but I wasn't scared anymore, not the way I had been those first few weeks. The whole experience taught me that asking for help wasn't being weak or dramatic. Speaking up when something felt wrong, trusting my instincts, getting the police involved immediately, all of that had probably saved us from something much worse. Thanks for hanging out and wondering through all of this with me. Definitely felt like a whole journey together. Until we meet again, take care. Subscribe for more content like this.